Well, hey, howdy, hi, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for stopping by to join me today. I really do appreciate it. My name is Ellie, and I'm a witch, and this over here is my teaching assistant, Andy, and today is something a little bit different on my channel. I'm going to be doing a book review. This is something that I've never done on my channel, but it's definitely something that I would like to do and to continue because I love reading. I have way too many books, and I love talking about them, so why not make a series on my channel? As of filming this, I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to call this series, but obviously it'll be in the title, and I'm hoping just to continue this. For the first book, we're going to be talking about The Wife Between Us. Now, this is going to be a little bit longer of a video. I have like 24 pages of script and a ton of quotes, so let's just go ahead and jump into the video. So as I said, I have a lot of quotes. The way that I kind of annotated the book is on the side here is the different chapters, and I'll explain why the different chapters are tabbed. And then all of these at the top are quotes that I'm going to be using in the video. They are color-coded per part. So the book starts by following the perspective of two different women, Nellie and Vanessa, in alternating chapters. Now, this is honestly the issue that I had with the book in the beginning. The reason that I have different colored tabs for each chapter is because it's alternating perspective, but it doesn't label which chapter is whose, and so that was just a way for me to keep track. So the alternating perspective by chapter is fine in general. I don't mind when a book does that, but because it doesn't specify whose chapter is about who before you start reading, it gets really confusing. Honestly, something as simple as naming the chapter by the character name rather than chapter number would have helped a lot. It was just confusing as someone who had I was trying to read this book over my lunches at work, or I went a day or two between picking up the book. It was just confusing not knowing who I was reading about from the jump of the chapter. Anyways, I digress. The book description sold me in picking up the book, so keep this description in mind while I go through the review. When you read this book, you will make many assumptions. You will assume you are reading about a jealous ex-wife. You will assume she is obsessed with her replacement, a beautiful younger woman who is about to marry the man they both love. You will assume you know the anatomy of this tangled love triangle. Assume nothing. Now, the first few pages are a prologue of an unnamed woman. I assume it is Vanessa. Now, the unnamed person is stalking another unnamed person. The only information that we get is that the stalker is stalking the main male's new lover or affair partner. Now, this is meant to set the tone for the novel, and I really wish it had continued this tone. Now, for the following chapters, I go through pretty much all of them, so it's going to be a long review. But for the quotes, I will throw up the quote on the screen. If there needs to be a little bit more context or isn't like the full paragraph or it's a little bit of back and forth and I'm just reading or going through parts of it, I will include what I'm leaving out in the quote that I put on the screen. So chapter 1 is from the perspective of Nellie. Now, she wakes up and for some reason she begins to think about her past. Her parents' divorce, how she didn't always have insomnia, and an unspecified event in October. So this quote is a little foreshadow of what is going to happen in part 2 of the book, and it does become an important plot point that keeps being brought up. Nellie couldn't talk about the warm, early fall night that had begun with bottles of vodka and laughter and ended with police sirens and despair. Moving on, we are brought back to the present. We learn Nellie lives with her best friend Samantha, who is a bit of a player. Nellie makes her way out of bed while thinking about her beau, Richard. He is 9 years older than Nellie, who is 27, and is a very wealthy and successful hedge fund manager. Now, Nellie makes her way to the kitchen. She grabs a cup with world's #1 teacher on it. Nellie and Sam are both teachers at the Learning Ladder, a preschool. And she drinks a bit of her coffee. Before she goes to the shower, she gets a phone call from a blocked number, which has apparently been happening quite a bit lately. She answers the phone, but no one says anything on the other end of the phone. Chapter 2 is from the perspective of Vanessa. Now, she is recovering from her divorce from her husband, Richard. She is in deep mourning of the relationship. She is broken beyond belief, unable to keep up with her shifts at work, constantly thinking about her lost love, and battling a very clear alcohol addiction. Vanessa currently lives with her Aunt Charlotte, who doesn't know the extent of her niece's pain. Essentially sleepwalking through life, she is trying to piece her life back together while still pining for Richard. A point to note from this chapter is that Vanessa's mother had some kind of a mental illness that is pretty severe. They call her bad days, bedridden days, her lights out days, during which Aunt Charlotte would come and take care of Vanessa. It is never specified what her issues are, but she has what is seemingly mania and extreme highs or the extreme lows. Now Vanessa goes and makes her coffee thinking of Richard, and this quote feels so weird and out of place, but it makes me laugh every time. I stir my coffee and wonder if Richard is making his new love coffee and bringing it back to bed, where she's drowsy and warm under the fluffy down comforter we used to share. I see her lips curve into a smile as she lifts the covers for him. Richard and I would often make love in the morning. And I'm sorry, but the last sentence is just entirely out of place and unneeded, but I can't, it's so funny. Anyways, at work, she helps a customer, but while that customer is trying on clothes, she notices a black and white dress, one that Richard had gotten her when they were still married, and it brings up a lot of bad memories, to the point that she takes all of the stock on the floor and hides it in the back room. As she is cleaning up from the customer, she hears a voice she knows, Hillary Cyril's. She tries to avoid a run-in, but she isn't quick enough. For her part, Hillary is actually very nice. She does tell Vanessa that Richard is engaged though, which wrecks Vanessa. She then begins to think of her last meeting with Hillary at a party Richard threw. The catering had shown up late, but Richard stepped behind the bar himself. Eventually he asked Vanessa to go get a specific wine in 09 revenue from the cellar. Vanessa knows that the wine isn't there, and we the reader are meant to think that this means that she drank it because of her drinking problem. Chapter 3 gives us some more information about Nellie. Sam gives her the advice to turn her phone off when she sleeps if the weird phone calls keep bothering her, which is decent advice. However, Nellie has a different internal response. Good idea, Nellie had lied, knowing she'd never follow the advice. She didn't listen to loud music while she jogged or commuted to work either, and she never walked home alone at night. So this makes it seem like she clearly has a history in the past of being attacked or some kind of trauma related to her safety, but I'm going to be honest, she's pretty stupid about her safety at times, but also it seems like we're meant to think that she's being stalked at times, so she's not always aware of it though. A good portion of the chapter is just about parent-teacher conferences, and it just feels like drivel. We do learn that Nellie is from Florida and was in a sorority in college. We also learn more about Richard and her. Now, Richard was married previously, and the two met shortly after their split. Richard does not talk about his ex, so the most that Nellie knows about her is that she has long dark hair and a narrow face, and she had found a grainy photo on Google from a benefit that the two had attended. The other thing Nellie knows about her is that she was constantly late, which annoyed Richard, and is the reason Nellie is sprinting to the restaurant they are meant to dine at. When she gets to the restaurant, she makes a quick stop at the bathroom, but as she enters the bathroom, another woman runs into her, knocking her bag and spilling its contents everywhere. But the woman doesn't apologize and just leaves. Now Nellie gets her stuff and goes to find Richard. As they are settling at the table, Nellie requests a half glass of wine since she had a drink with her fellow teachers earlier, leading Richard to comment, "You sometimes get a headache when you drink during the day." It isn't clear yet, but becomes glaringly obvious that both Nellie and Vanessa have drinking problems, and quotes like this give a little insight into the early stages. This comment, however, triggers a memory of how the two met. They met on a plane after Richard gave up his first-class seat to the army officer next to Nellie. Now, she doesn't like flying, and Richard calms her down, and then that gets them talking, and the two exchange numbers, and the romance goes from there. The chapter ends with, "He handed her a pen from his suit pocket, and she tilted her head to jot it down on a napkin, her long blonde hair falling forward in front of her shoulders. Richard reached out and gently ran his fingers down the length of it before tucking it behind her ear. So beautiful. Don't ever cut it." Which honestly just gave off controlling vibes in my mind right away. Chapter 4, we learn this little tidbit. "I know how she sounds. I call her sometimes, but I use a burner phone with a blocked number." We also get more exposition about how sad Vanessa is that her marriage is over, to the point she isn't sleeping at night, and is kept up by all these questions about why her marriage ended, and the memories of her now ex-husband. A quote that still bothers me now that I've finished the book and know the twist is, "Does she ever think about me and feel guilty for what she did?" Vanessa's also stalking the new couple, watching them as they go on dates. Another big point that is really important comes up in this chapter, and that is children. Vanessa and Richard really wanted children, but it never happened for them. This is a big point of contention between the two later on, but when anybody talks about having kids, it bothers me how they talk about the whole thing. "I'd enter the marriage with nothing. I hadn't worked, I hadn't borne him children, I'd been deceitful, I hadn't been a good wife." While this could also have a reference to another point that comes up later, it is a constant that they dog on Vanessa for not getting pregnant as if she is the only one who was a part of that process, and you can tell how little she thinks of herself when she says things like this, and this is one of the few times I feel nothing but sadness for her. In this chapter, we get another insight into her drinking problem. I used to have it delivered to the house I shared with Richard, at least until he asked me to stop drinking. Then I drove to a gourmet market a half-hour away so I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. On recycling day, I took early morning walks and slipped empty bottles into neighbors' bins. This is a sign of a problem. If you have to hide your drinking, then you have a problem. Not to mention that she says bottles, plural, every week. Bear in mind, she's trying to get pregnant at this time. Another quote to remember for later. What separates a fling from a marriage proposal? I thought Richard was just going to have some fun. I expected their affair to blaze hot and extinguish itself quickly. I pretended not to know, to look the other way. Besides, who could blame Richard? I wasn't the woman he married nearly a decade ago. I'd gained weight, I rarely left the house, and I'd begun to search for hidden meanings in Richard's actions, seizing upon clues that I thought indicated he was tiring of me. This shows promise for the plot that she isn't a scorned ex-wife, as she never accused him of anything, rather this is the internal turmoil for her. However, the intended plot summary immediately is forgotten when Vanessa realizes that Richard and his new girl are simply engaged, so it isn't too late. I fumble for my bag and grab my phone. Richard's numbers are still programmed in. I'll get right back to you, his recorded message promises. Richard always keeps his promises. Richard, I blurt out, it's me. I heard about your engagement and I just need to talk to you. In response to her voicemail, Richard texts her saying, I'm sorry, but there's nothing more to say. Take care, R. Chapter 5 doesn't give us too much in the way of importance, but we do learn that Samantha does not like Richard, though it is never explained why. We also get this insight into Richard being a little bit shitty, I guess you could say. When her eyes adjusted, she found herself staring up at a large brick house with a sold sign staked in the front yard. It's your wedding present, Nellie. She turned to look at him. He was beaming. Who in their right mind buys a house without their partner's insight? She isn't even allowed to dislike it because if she did, she'd be painted as ungrateful. This on its own, though, is not enough to say he's manipulative, but then I read on. I know you wanted to live in the suburbs. The city is so loud and stressful. Had she told him that? Nellie wondered. She'd complained about the chaos of Manhattan, but couldn't recall saying she wanted to move. Chapter 6 brings us more of that gross ideology that women alone are responsible for pregnancy. Richard and I wanted children. A baker's dozen, he liked to joke, but privately we had agreed on 3. I'd stopped working. We had a maid come every week. This was my only job. I honestly called Richard being infertile the first time the difficulty of getting pregnant was mentioned, but they just hammer home that idea, and it isn't the plot twist that it's intended to be. The other notable quote, once again referring to Vanessa's drinking problem, but what Richard said was, maybe you should stop drinking altogether. Which is not a bad idea if you're actively trying to get pregnant, and once again points to her having an addiction. Chapter 7 brings up another weird point with Richard. Has he told you where you're going for the honeymoon yet? Nellie shook her head. I will say that I am not married, was engaged, but I am currently single, thank God. So perhaps I'm just not in the know with these things, but when I was engaged and planning the wedding and we were talking about the honeymoon, it was a joint conversation. I love surprises as much as the next girl, but it feels weird to not know where you're honeymooning, no? Please let me know if that is normal, because I would not enjoy that, and it especially seems weird after learning he bought Nellie a whole house without her input. Now Nellie gets asked about her honeymoon while out with her friends for her bachelorette party, so that's the scene, by the way. The group goes from a restaurant to a club, totally normal. What is not normal is this interaction. Hey, Nick, Josie said as a tall, slim guy in a faded Rolling Stones concert circa 1979 t-shirt and dark wash jeans walked up to them. What are you doing here, Nellie asked. Josie invited me. I moved back a few weeks ago. Nick is Nellie's kind of ex. They had a thing. She was way into him. He's a player who was just into her for sex, and then he moved away. With that context, who in their right mind invites him to their friend's bachelorette party? I'm sorry, Nellie, but Josie is not your friend. She is clearly trying to stir shit up. Anyway, he confesses that he still has feelings for her, and he missed her and wants to get back together. She reminisces about how good the sex was with Nick, better than what she has with Richard, which is not cool. He kisses her, she doesn't push him away for a bit. Richard is there for some reason and sees this, and he tells her he's leaving, and she eventually goes with him. Notably, she does not apologize for the kiss. Instead, she says, that guy, I used to work with him. That is the extent of the justification for kissing another man. Chapter 8 gives us another reason to doubt who's the infertile one in the couple, but after those 6 months of failed tests, he went to a doctor to have his sperm analyzed. His sperm count was normal. The doctor said, I've got Michael Phelps swimmers, he joked. So she didn't go with him. So again, just take a sledgehammer to the point that he is very clearly the infertile one. But don't you worry, the author will mention it at least 40 more times before the book is over. It's also in this chapter that we learn that Vanessa was pregnant at 21, but she had an abortion. She tells the doctor and Richard that she had a miscarriage, though. This enrages Richard, and this is going to just add fuel to the fire that she is one who had the issues and is the reason they can't get pregnant, even though that is not to any degree true. Chapter 9 has more mentions of someone trying to disrupt Richard and Nellie. Her reverie was interrupted by the house phone ringing. Richard, she thought, feeling a rush of joy as she ran back into the kitchen and grabbed the receiver. But the voice that greeted her was feminine. Is Richard there? No, Nellie hesitated. Is this Maureen? Silence. Then the woman replied, No, I'll call him back. How lovely. I'm glad Richard found himself a nice young lady. The last one wasn't very friendly. Oh? Mrs. Keene leaned closer. I saw her talking to Mike, the doorman, just last week. She was quite agitated. Clearly, there is someone who doesn't want Richard and Nellie together, and the most likely culprit is the ex-wife. There is an internal struggle going through Nellie, though. She clearly wants to know more, but Richard is very cryptic and doesn't talk about his ex, which in some ways is very good. You don't want someone too hung up on an ex, but talking about past relationships and why they ended will give you insight into the person you're dating. What he said about his ex-wife was, she wasn't who I thought she was. Nellie did try to dig a little bit, but when she asked where the couple had met, Richard shut her down. Come on, sweetheart, I'm with you. The last thing I want to talk about is her. His words were gentle, but his tone wasn't. Towards the end of the chapter, Nellie goes to the preschool to get her classroom ready for summer, but notices a figure watching the school. Nellie pulled her phone out of her pocket, then pressed her face close to the window. The woman suddenly moved, hurrying away, blending in with the trees. Nellie spotted the woman round the corner by the 3 gravestones. Chapter 10 opens what I can only assume are threats from Vanessa, who will miss her when she disappears. She thinks she's safe now. No matter the context, these are just weird things to think, but honestly, extra alarming given the context is that Vanessa is stalking this woman while thinking these things. Later in the chapter, we flash back to when she was married, and we see another symptom of addiction. Richard and I agreed that I'd stop drinking, but surely a few sips wouldn't hurt. I have sympathy for alcoholics. Addiction is a disease. But the problem that I have with the book is that it isn't treated as an issue. It's almost painted like it's a funny little quirk that Vanessa has. She can't stop drinking, tee-hee. When she, in actuality, has a problem, and I wish we had seen her get help for it. Besides that, there is an odd interaction between the couple. I remembered you told me once lamb vindaloo was your favorite dish. I said that. Richard bent his head to take a fork full of rice. I felt puzzled. Hadn't he? This ends up being unresolved, but it feels like a manipulation. This is after Richard is so upset that Vanessa had been pregnant and he thinks it's a betrayal. So it could be that he's purposely being aloof, but it feels like a manipulation of some kind. I just can't figure out what type. Back to the present, Vanessa is listening to a podcast about psychiatry, and the authors almost get the point, but somehow miss it by a mile. Our genes are not our destiny, insisted the speaker, but he acknowledged that addiction is hereditary. I think of the way my mother left a trail of destruction. I think of the way my mother dug her nails into her palms when she was agitated, and I think, always, of her. So close to recognizing that she has a problem. Literally wrote the word addiction, and then there is no accountability. She can and has acknowledged that her mother had issues that are hereditary, but can't take a single shred of responsibility. I'm unsure if the authors meant to have this degree of unreliability in the narrator, but I do not trust Vanessa's stories as far as I can throw her. The chapter ends with more ominous shit. Richard cannot marry again. I begin to make preparations. The next time I see her, I will be ready. Chapter 11 starts with the same shit, different day vibes, though I do have a nitpick. She managed to doze off at some point, but at 6 a.m. a jackhammer erupted outside of her apartment. She staggered out of bed and closed her window, but the incessant sputtering continued. She is supposedly on high alert at every turn, and supposedly is insanely security conscious. But she sleeps with her window open? I'm sorry, but no. I am also very paranoid as a person. All of my doors are locked. I am always aware of my surroundings. Don't go out alone at night, have a taser and mace handy, lock my windows at night. No one as scared as Nellie and I is leaving our windows open. Moving on. Nellie gets an email from the wedding photographer asking if she wanted a refund or to move the date. Confused, she calls the photographer. Yeah, here's the message. We got a call last week that the wedding was being postponed. Now, luckily, the photographer was able to rearrange her schedule to be able to attend the wedding after all, but obviously this was weird, leading the reader to assume it was the ex-wife, and leaving Nellie befuddled without a clue in the world who had done it. Now, chapter 12 is when we first see the signs of physical abuse. There have been signs that Richard is controlling and manipulative, but here we see what is possibly the abusive cycle. At the bottom is a padded black jewelry box. I open it and see a diamond choker. It's a necklace I could never bear to wear because Richard gave it to me after one of our worst fights. The abusive cycle is exactly what it sounds like. For those unaware, it's common in abusive relationships for the abuser to abuse their partner or child and then give them a gift. In the media, we most commonly see flowers to the victim and apologize. I'll never do it again. I don't know what came over me. I never meant to hurt you. The fact she can't bring herself to wear it because it was given to her after a fight is a pretty big indicator that she was abused during that fight. As we move through the chapter, Vanessa is obviously still thinking about the other woman. Is she scared, I wonder? Does she sense what's coming? Like the last chapter with Vanessa, this feels threatening, less so admittedly, but now with the added idea that Richard is abusive, it feels a little less threatening, but rather mildly compassionate. Vanessa ends up calling Richard's sister in an attempt to get her on her side, but obviously this is a stupid idea. Have you met her? I blurt. He can't marry her. He doesn't love her. He can't. I agree it's very sudden. Maureen's voice is kinder when she speaks again. And I know it's hard to see him with another woman, to think of him with anyone else, but Richard has moved on. Then the last frayed thread tying me to Richard is severed with a click of the phone. Vanessa is obviously not going to give up and is determined to get the new fiancé alone, so she heads to the restaurant she is sure the couple will be at as the chapter ends. Now, chapter 13 has a strange bit that had me questioning if there was like an incestuous angle to the story. Actually, you're too early. Maureen was just about to tell me all your deep, dark secrets, Nellie joked. As soon as Nellie spoke, she saw Richard's features briefly tighten. Then he smiled. She expected him to come back around the table to sit next to her, but he took the chair to Maureen's right, diagonally across from Nellie. During the dinner, it was mainly Richard and Maureen catching up, and they excluded Nellie. This only made her feel more uncomfortable than she already was, since this was her first time that she was meeting the only family that Richard has left. 14 is back at it with the drinking problem. Vanessa was meeting Richard in a restaurant they frequented, but she arrived first. She chose to wait at the bar for him, but while she was there, a man bought her a drink. She told him she was married, but chose to drink a few sips of the wine. She was not supposed to be drinking since they had agreed on that, but also she was trying to get pregnant. Drinking a few sips to be polite rather than outright turning the drink away. If she was not an addict, she could have easily turned the drink down, but instead she chose to drink while excusing the behavior once again. On the night when the stranger bought me a glass of wine and I'd taken a few sips to avoid being rude, our meal had been ruined. Who was that guy you were flirting with at the bar? It is not cheating, nor is it flirting to accept a drink from a stranger when you have told them that you are not interested or are taken. Period. The drink has been made, it is wasteful, and as long as you are upfront about it, there is nothing wrong with a free drink. I have been out with an ex-partner when I have gotten a free drink. It is not a big deal. The issue should not have been the stranger's involvement, but rather Vanessa not being able to turn down a drink when she had agreed to stop drinking. Anyway, the couple get into a fight at the table loud enough that the neighboring tables are fully aware of the conflict and are looking, and Vanessa rushes out of the restaurant. I stood outside, tears streaming down my cheeks. I wondered where I could go. Then he appeared. I'm sorry, honey. I knew he truly meant it. I had a horrible day. I should never have taken it out on you. Once again, we see a demonstration of the cycle of abuse. Chapter 15 brings us more stalking. Hey, are you coming back here tonight? Sam asked. I wasn't planning on it. What's up? Some woman came to check out the apartment. She said she heard I was looking for a new roommate. After she left, I couldn't find my keys. Richard sends a locksmith to get the apartment rekeyed and saves the day as usual. Now, Nellie expresses concerns about this event, though, especially since she was getting hang-up calls and hearing the ex-wife showed up to the apartment building. Richard brushes away her concerns, saying that the calls aren't a big deal and that Sam probably just misplaced her keys again. This next part is never addressed further and has no resolution, so it's weird to include it in the story, so I might as well mention it here. As she climbed in next to him, she noticed the silver-framed photograph in his nightstand was tilted away to face the wall. It was a picture of her sitting on a bench in Central Park wearing jean shorts and a tank top. Richard always said he liked to see it when he woke up one morning she wasn't there. Richard noticed too and reached to turn it back around. The maid was here. Richard does open up to her about his past in this chapter. He tells her about how hard it was for him growing up, how he worked as a caddy, lifeguard, and waiter. His parents hadn't finished college, and Maureen was the one who helped him with homework and who took him in and paid for him to go to college after their parents had died. It is a lovely moment between the couple, but then it gets a little bit weird. Sure, he said. Nellie was about to ask more about his parents, but Richard's voice stopped her. I'm B. Let's drop this, okay? So he starts the conversation, but God forbid she have any follow-up or clarifying questions about his parents. Now, I totally get that it is a sore subject for him. And knowing what I know about the whole situation, I can sympathize, but of course Nellie will be curious about his past and his parents specifically. I will say that I lost my dad in a very traumatic way when I was exceptionally young, but my partners all know, and I'm more than happy to talk about my dad. I completely understand that that feeling is not universal. Some people can't talk about it, but don't bring it up if you're going to shut down any attempt to continue the conversation. The chapter ends with this almost ominous back and forth. I thought you could save me. Save you? She echoed. His words were a whisper. From myself. Chapter 16 starts with an assumed suicide and only gets more offensive from there. Jumping back to when Vanessa first moved to New York, she was walking to work when she saw police and a gray blanket crumpled on the ground. Someone in a crowd nearby was talking about the jumper, and she realized that the blanket covered a body, and she looked over as a police officer picked up a shoe nearby. Struck by the thought of this shoe and the woman it belonged to, she searched the newspapers for any mention, but there wasn't much information. Unable to understand how someone could commit a desperate act, she wondered if it was planned or if the woman had snapped that day. I think I figured out the answer all these years later. It was both, because something inside me has finally cracked open, but I've come to realize I've also been heading towards this moment all along. The phone calls, the watching, the other things I've done, I've been circling around my replacement, drawing closer to her, assessing her, preparing. Her life with Richard is beginning, my life feels as if it's ending. Using someone else's suicide as a sick justification for your behavior is honestly just really sad and disgusting. It was at this point that I had to put the book down for a little bit to process. The tagline on the cover of the book, the whole premise that she's not in this love triangle, she isn't a scorned ex-wife, that she didn't want her husband back. How else are you meant to read this section? I read the whole book, I know the twist, but reading this over again, it's still sick and not okay to connect these ideas together. Chapter 17 lets us meet Nellie's mom, who is honestly a little bit of a breath of fresh air. Let me just say something. You've told me that facials make you break out. Why wouldn't you tell that to Richard? And he bought you a house that you haven't even seen? Do you want to live in the suburbs? Completely valid concerns. But Nellie brushes it off and is honestly annoyed her mom would even consider talking about Richard as anything but an overly positive light. But she turns around and calls the resort to change the facials to massages instead, so she clearly understands that her mother is correct to a degree. Chapter 18 starts as Vanessa approaches the new fiancé. My replacement doesn't see me coming. By the time she senses my approach and shock fills her eyes, I am very close. She looks around wildly, probably trying to find an escape. We also find out something that I assume most people reading the book already figured out. In my old life, I even had another name. The first time we met, Richard nicknamed me Nellie. That was all he ever called me. From this point forward, the alternating chapters stop as the author unveiled that the two narrators were the same person all along. We also get another revelation that doesn't really say much, but later I'd learn he had an ex, a dark-haired woman he'd lived with. She'd been upset when they broke up. After Richard proposed, her existence haunted me. I felt her presence everywhere, and I was right. Someone was following me. It just wasn't Richard's ex. With that revelation, we get to part 2 of the book and start with chapter 19. Her name is Emma. She was Richard's assistant, that's how they met. Less than a year after she was hired to replace his secretary Diane, he left me for her. So, which makes sense. He started opening up to me as a colleague, as a friend. I'm not the kind of woman who ever thought she'd have an affair with a married man. We didn't expect to fall in love. Richard does this. He confuses things so we can't see the truth. He told me you were jealous, but this has gotten out of control. I saw you outside my building last week. Richard said if you pull something like this again, we'll file a restraining order. Vanessa is clearly not getting through to Emma how she hoped, so she pulls out her last attempt to persuade her, telling her the story about the wine from the early chapters, but Emma is unmoved. Emma turns to me. I was there, and I know the wine was delivered. I'm Richard's assistant. Who do you think placed the order? At this, Emma leaves, and Vanessa feels stuck. She tried her hardest to convince Emma, but she was countered at every turn. Though it is becoming more clear that Vanessa is not a reliable narrator, whether by design or not, I'm unsure. As we go further into the chapter, we get a flashback of her honeymoon. They had gone out scuba diving, and it was not something Vanessa could handle, and she freaks out underwater. Richard and Vanessa are held back into the boat by the instructor and boated back to shore. Eric reached down for my hand again. Here. My legs were unsteady, but I managed to stretch out my arm for him to take. But Richard said, I've got her. He gripped my upper left arm and pulled me out of the boat. I winced at the feel of his fingers pressing into my soft flesh as he held me tightly to stabilize me. weird display of jealousy from Richard, and this is clearly a sign of what's to come in regards to physical abuse. The couple goes back to the hotel, and Vanessa takes some meds to help her sleep. As she's lying in the bed, her phone rings, and it's a blocked number. She answers it, but hears nothing but breathing and hangs up. She is so distraught that she throws her phone on the floor and then puts it in the trash. She goes to bed and notices her arm is starting to bruise where Richard had grabbed her while helping her out of the boat. Skipping ahead a chapter to chapter 21, we get some insight into her need for security. When they were married, there was a break-in at her house when only Vanessa was home. Police arrived and no one was hurt, but when asked if she saw anyone, she said she hadn't. But that wasn't completely true. I had seen a face, but not in one of our windows. It was visible only in my memory. It belongs to someone I last encountered in Florida, someone who blames me, who wants me punished for the cataclysmic events of that fall evening. I had a new name, a new address, I'd even changed my phone number. I'd always feared it wouldn't be enough. The story goes back to when she was in college. She realizes she is pregnant with her boyfriend Daniel's baby, she doesn't know how to feel about this revelation, and wants to talk to him first. The issue is that he's a professor, and teacher-student relationships are generally frowned upon, but are also grounds for termination depending on the school. She approaches him as he's leaving a lecture, and he's immediately on edge and brushes her off. He tells her that they can talk later, and she doesn't explain what she needs to talk to him about, so he walks off. Vanessa is of course distraught, but goes back to her sorority because that night is pledge night. Her little sister is a girl named Maggie. Vanessa is too preoccupied to acknowledge anyone else as she goes to her room, assumes the fetal position, and cries, while trying to call Daniel, who promptly declines her calls. I'd never been to his place because he lived with 2 other professors in faculty housing. I knew his address, though. I thought, tomorrow isn't good enough. Chapter 22 brings us back to the present. I still remember how I'd bristled when Sam seemed suspicious of Richard, or when my mother expressed concern that I seemed to be losing my identity. But I'd assumed Emma would at least listen to me, that I would have the opportunity to plant doubts that might prompt her to take a closer look at the man she is choosing to spend the rest of her life with. But clearly she'd already formed a strong opinion of me, one that tells her I'm not to be trusted. It is a little bit insane to assume that you can change the mind of someone about a topic that you yourself ignore trusted friends and family's opinions on. Emma should not trust you, and has no reason to. You are the ex-wife trying to sabotage her future. Excuse her for rightfully not trusting a word you say. As we go on, Richard comes to the apartment to speak to Vanessa in person. The point in coming is to give Vanessa closure so that she leaves him and Emma alone, but it doesn't go so great. I think you should get help. An inpatient stay somewhere, maybe the place where your mom went. You don't want to end up like she did. Don't love that he is weaponizing her mom's illness and her death, as it is immediately followed up by a discussion of her mother ending her own life, to ask her to get help. I do think that Vanessa needs help truly, but this is not the way you go about it. Richard then writes her a check for an apparently obscene amount of money. She says she doesn't want his money. Nellie, I love Emma. A sharp pain bursts in my chest, but I will never love anyone as much as I loved you. And that has got to sting. Although I don't buy the she isn't in love with him angle, because if loving someone else hurts her like this, it's love. Also, he was married before, so I don't believe for a second he hasn't used that line before. He also does end up kissing her, which she enjoys, but eventually backs up from, and he leaves. Chapter 23 gives us more of the psychobabble that is supposed to perfectly explain something and make the audience rethink what we know. The human body often responds in the same way to 2 overarching emotional states, romantic arousal and fear. Is that what Emma is experiencing, I wonder? Is that what I encounter too? Now, this did not sound right to me or real, so I did a little bit of research, and I'm actually happy to say that I am wrong to a degree. Arousal, in terms of psychology, refers to a physiological state of being alert, awake, and ready to respond to stimuli. Arousal is linked to excitement, fear, anxiety, or anger. Too little arousal can lead to lethargy or poor performance. In regards to fear and arousal, in the context of romance, we have to look at misattribution of arousal, which means confusing a physiological arousal to a person or situation that didn't cause it. An example would be that you are more likely to be interested in someone after you cross an unstable suspension bridge and meet them on the bridge or on the other side than you are if you meet that same person around a sturdy bridge. This is because you have the same symptoms from fear as you do with romantic arousal. The increased heart rate, the other anxiety and fear symptoms, and the adrenaline. A perfect example is Vanessa. She and Richard met on an airplane and bonded while airborne. Vanessa is terrified of air travel, so her fear and adrenaline were heightened, so she feels more attracted to Richard than she might have under different circumstances. The issue is that the authors aren't using it in that context and are trying to apply it to Emma as well, boiling it down to fear equals arousal, and Vanessa is assuming Emma has a reason to be scared of Richard, even though the recognizable abuse does not start until after marriage. Chapter 24 goes back to the sorority storyline. Now, Vanessa essentially sleepwalks through the sorority hazing pledge initiation, the last part of which happens outside of the house. The pledges were walked down to the beach and told to strip. The sisters were supposed to be watching their own little sisters, but Vanessa told the vice president of the sorority she wasn't feeling well and asked if she could watch Maggie. No one really liked Maggie. She was shy and very negative, had a complaint about everything that night. But the VP agreed to watch her and Vanessa left. She had headed to speak with Daniel. Knowing only vaguely where he lived, she was able to find his car and therefore which house was his. She rang the bell and a woman answered the door. This tripped Vanessa up, but she asked if Professor Barton, Daniel, was home. He arrived to the door and gave a little lie of turning in the wrong paper, to which he told her to turn it in the next day and tried to shut the door. The woman stopped him and questioned why this paper was so important. She asked what class it was even for, and Daniel and Vanessa said different classes, which clued in the woman. Vanessa realized this is his wife, and she had been lied to. His wife, of course, was upset and tells Vanessa to stay away from her husband. As she walks down the steps to make her way back to the sorority house, she notices kids' toys on the lawn. He already had children. He gives her some flowers for an apology, but tells her he loves his wife and it's over between them. She ends up getting an abortion, and this is not the only tragedy from that night, though. When the pledges returned from the ocean, Maggie was missing. Maggie and Emma have nothing in common, except for me. These two young women have forever changed the course of my existence, but one is now gone from my life, and the other is ever present. Chapter 25 is of little importance. What was notable, though, involved a cake topper. It was a cake topper that Richard insists to be used for each of his weddings, and he said that it was his parents that they had used in their wedding. Well, Vanessa's at Richard's alone when she notices a picture is missing from the wall, and she goes down to the storage unit to investigate. She finds the wedding topper, but as she puts it away, she notices the date on the bottom of the topper is 1985, which is at least a decade after his parents' wedding. She finds this odd, but doesn't know what to make of this new discovery, so she reboxes it and goes back to the apartment. This does end up getting addressed, but not until the end of the book, so I'll leave it for that. Chapter 26 mainly focuses on a dog named Duke. Because Vanessa is so security conscious, Richard gets her a trained guard dog. But the problem is that Vanessa is terrified of dogs. It is unknown if Richard knew that before, but she does not voice her fear out loud during this time. She does eventually warm up to Duke, and they get on swimmingly, but when she tells Richard how much she loves Duke, it isn't but a few days later that he goes missing. Vanessa is distraught, and Richard is seemingly very caring and attentive, searching everywhere he can, but Duke is gone. Vanessa is suspicious that Richard got rid of Duke, and that they have this interaction after a few drinks. A break? He pulled back. From what? His brow furrowed. I wanted to say from everything, but instead I replied, from the Clomid. You're drunk, you don't mean that? Yeah, I guess I am a little bit tipsy, but I do mean it. I'm not going to take it anymore. Don't you think this is something we should discuss as a couple? It's a joint decision. Was it a joint decision to get rid of Duke? They had a little spat, and Richard ends up agreeing that they should stop the fertility medication and it is too much on her at that moment. They leave the fight unresolved, which means Vanessa is left to stew on her suspicions. Jumping back a few pages, though, to an interaction involving Maureen, it isn't wholly important to anything, it just felt weird, and I had this feeling that something was off between the siblings. This was another point. The Knicks games the next night. We got a sports theme going on here, she laughed. She and Richard were both basketball fans. You should take Maureen to the game, I said. That was my plan all along, Maureen replied lightly. I remember Richard tried to explain goaltending to you once and I saw you zone out. There isn't anything wrong with siblings going, and Maureen is the one who got the tickets and she likes basketball. The issue I think is that it feels purposeful to exclude Vanessa and making it obvious that she was never allowed to go, as that was the plan in buying the tickets. She could have bought 3 tickets and the 3 could have gone. Even if Vanessa couldn't follow the game, it would still feel like she was being included in their family. Chapter 28 gives us the first account of blatant physical abuse. It starts at a work event for Richard. The moment he left, Richard leans closer to me. How much have you had to drink, sweetheart? His words were innocuous, but his body held an unnatural stillness. Not that much, I said quickly. By my count, you had 3 glasses of champagne, and all that wine. His hand increased its pressure on my lower back. Forget dinner, he whispered in my ear. Let's head home. Richard then pulls aside to Collie to let him know that they were leaving. But I wasn't drunk. Richard only wanted everyone to think I was. Then they go home. She stumbles up the stairs and blames it on the new heels. He doesn't believe her. He then starts to question her. One of the neighbors mentioned seeing you at the train station the other day. All dressed up, he said. Funny, but when I called you that morning, you said you'd been swimming laps at the club, and that's why you didn't answer the phone. She simply says that she was visiting her aunt in the city, and Richard seems to believe that. What I can't figure out is why you waited until I left for work, got all dressed up, took the train into the city, came home in time to cook dinner, and sat there eating lasagna with me, but never once mentioned you'd visited your aunt. He paused for a moment. Where did you really go? Who were you with? I heard a sound like a bird's cry, and realized I'd made it. Richard was gripping my wrist, twisting it as he spoke. He looked down and instantly let go, but white ovals from his fingertips remained like a burn. I'm sorry. He took a step back, ran a hand through his hair, exhaled slowly. But why the fuck did you lie to me? Clearly there is no justification for what he did, and we do not lay our hands on other people, period. However, even knowing what I know about what happens later, she should have had an answer. Whether true or not, he was in the right for expecting her to say something, and I can understand his anger. He is being blatantly lied to, and there is understandably some distrust. The scene does escalate though. I didn't even see his open palm coming until it connected with my cheek in a loud crack. She is distraught afterwards, but covers the bruises with sleeves and makeup. The chapter ends with the revelation that her mother has died, and this gives Richard his opportunity to swoop in and comfort her, making himself the hero again. Chapter 29 gives us more of the abusive cycle. So the couple cleans out her mother's house, and Richard opens up to her a bit more and vows to be better. All I want is to be a good husband to you, but I know I haven't always been. You're lonely because I work such long hours, and my temper. I'm sorry, Nellie. I've been stressed. The market's been crazy, but nothing is as important as you, as us. I'm going to make it up to you. I want you to be happy, Nellie. Your mother wasn't always happy. Well, mine wasn't either. She tried to act like she was for me and Maureen, but we knew. I don't want that to happen to you. My dad wasn't always good to my mom. I could live with anything except being a bad husband to you. I have been, though. They have sex and she thinks the whole thing is going to turn around. Promise me something, I whispered. Anything, my love. Promise things won't get bad for us again. They won't. It was the first promise to me he'd ever broken, because things got even worse. After this, we get more information about what happened with Maggie, specifically with her family. I described how I'd gone to offer condolences to Maggie's family. Her parents had merely nodded, so dazed they'd appeared incapable of forming speech. But her older brother Jason, who was a senior at Grant University like me, had gripped my outstretched hand, not to shake it, to pin me in place. I would agree he isn't wrong. Jason then begins to stalk and torment her though. Exactly a month after Maggie's death, I awoke to hear one of my sorority sisters shrieking. I ran downstairs in my boxers and t-shirt and saw the overturned chairs, the shattered lamp, the obscenities spray painted in black across our living room wall. Bitches, whores, and the message I knew was meant for me only: you killed her. They called the police, but Vanessa does not want to press charges. While they're debating what color to repaint the walls, Vanessa gets a call from an undisclosed number. When she answers, the only thing she hears is breathing. A few days later, the police say that they had questioned Jason and he confessed. He apparently apologized, said he was simply drunk, and would get counseling. He also was never allowed near the house again. Now Vanessa starts planning where she will go after graduation. At her graduation, she spotted Jason in the crowd, assuming he was there for her. A few months after graduation, Leslie emailed a newspaper link to a few of us. Jason had been arrested for drunk driving. Vanessa feels responsible for leading Jason down this road, but she never follows up on what happened to him as a result. She moves to New York, falls in love with Richard, but her mom takes out an announcement in the newspaper in her hometown about the engagement. This announcement has her name, Richard's name, where she lived, and she starts getting all these weird hang-up calls. And chapter 30 gives us some gaslighting, maybe? You're insane. I ignore this. Those words from him no longer have the power to derail me. Did you tell her you kissed me last night? What? He shouts. You kissed me. For a moment my pace falters. Then I recall what I said to Emma the first time I confronted her. Richard does this. He confuses things so we can't see the truth. I am torn on this one. Obviously we see the abuse she has endured, but she's also seemingly an unreliable narrator. So gaslighting, maybe. As the chapter continues, we learn that Vanessa had a notebook that she kept while she was married. It detailed the weird goings-on, like her not remember expressing wanting to live in the city, thinking that Richard told her that lamb vindaloo was his favorite meal, the hang-up calls that started after she'd gotten engaged, the Duke running away. We then jump to being focused on Emma. I have wronged her so deeply. I preyed on her innocence. Just as I was never the wife Richard thought I was, I am also not the woman Emma believed me to be. She reminisces on meeting Emma for the first time at the office during a work party. She expressed to Richard that she likes Emma. A little after the event, they were supposed to attend a symphony, but she came down with an illness, so suggested that Richard take Emma. That night, Richard didn't come home. After that, Emma accompanied Richard on all of his business trips, and during those trips, Richard didn't call or text Vanessa good nights as he usually had. Vanessa knew that the affair was underway. Back to the present, Vanessa's outside Emma's apartment. She buzzes all the apartments and someone lets her in. She gets to Emma's door and is able to slip a note under the door. The chapter, and part 2, ends with a revelation from the past. As I hung up the phone, I realized, for the first time in a long while, I was smiling. I'd found my perfect replacement. Soon Richard would be done with me and I'd finally be free. Neither of them knew what I'd orchestrated. They still don't. Part 3, Chapter 31, recaps the abuse that we had already covered, adding that there was also a picture broken after the incident on their honeymoon. We also get a continuation of the slapping interaction. The sound of his palm against my cheek was like a gunshot. I fell onto the hard tile floor. I stared up at him, holding my hand to my face. What? How could you? He reached down and I thought he was going to help me to my feet, to beg for my forgiveness, to explain he'd meant to strike the cabinet behind me. Instead, he grabbed my hair in his fist and yanked me upright. Stop, please, I begged. He let go, but leaned in to pin me against the edge of the counter. He wasn't hurting me now, but I knew it was the most dangerous moment of the night, of my life. I have an issue with the "of my life" part because I know another arguably more dangerous to her life thing that happens later on. Bracelet that perfectly covers her bruised wrist. Back in the present, Vanessa is in the bank trying to get the check deposited. The teller doesn't want to without authorization because of the amount. She is in a time crunch though, because Richard is pissed she won't leave Emma alone, so it's logical that he would cancel the check. She manipulates the teller into cashing the check though. Chapter 32 gives us Vanessa impersonating Emma. The point of this is so that she can sneak into his office because she needs proof that Richard canceled the wine delivery that fateful night of the party. We also get some more information about that night. I needed to accomplish 3 things that night. Convince everyone at the party that Richard's wife was a bit of a mess, convince Emma that Richard deserved better, and most importantly, convince Richard of the same. We also find out that Vanessa had given the caterers the wrong time on purpose, and then was rude to staff in an attempt to make Emma hate her. Vanessa goes to the music player, an iPod that was playing jazz and classical. She changed it to 70s disco music, declaring they needed to get the party started. Richard quickly intercepts her and changes the music back, much to everyone's relief. He took her wine and was keeping a close eye on her the rest of the night. I'd accomplished everything I'd set out to do, and it was worth it. Even though my bruises didn't heal for 2 weeks, Richard never sent me a new piece of jewelry to make amends for the misunderstanding. This was confirmation he was no longer invested in us. His focus was shifting. Back to the present, Vanessa as Emma makes it into his office with relative ease and starts going through his drawers and records. I find one marked Amex and leaf through his statements until I find one for February. What I'm searching for is right at the top. Sauce, Bees, Wine, $3,150 refund. I'm sorry, I have a list, but it was really difficult to say. Chapter 33 has some bonding between Vanessa and her aunt, but a few pages in, we jump back in time. It was Dr. Hoffman who finally suggested that me and Richard should have a second semen analysis. Didn't anyone tell him that? She'd asked as I sat in her immaculate office during one of my annual physicals. There can be errors in any medical test. It's standard to repeat the sperm analysis after 6 months or a year. This is just so unusual for a healthy young woman like yourself to be having this much trouble. Duh? That's all I have to say. After the suggestion, Richards agrees to get tested, and Vanessa decides that last minute she'll join him, but the clinic confirms that he had canceled the appointment. She brushed it off that he must have had something come up at work. However, that night he came home and said the doc said his sperm count was still going strong. Back to the present. I used my phone to take a photograph of the entire page, making sure the date, the name of the wine store, and the amount stands out clearly. Then I texted to Emma with a one-line message. You placed the order, but who canceled it? Chapter 34 does not make us wait. Emma's response arrives the next morning, also in the form of a single-line text message. Meet me at my apartment at 6 tonight. Vanessa later gets a call from an animal charity stating that Richard had canceled the monthly donations. She apologizes and asks to change the donation amount instead. That's very generous of you. Your ex-husband explained how terrible he feels about this. He said he would personally call Maggie's family to let them know what happened. He asked me to relay that to you so you don't have to worry about any loose ends. This is a revelation because the point in opening the animal charity was to give back to the family. She had no idea that Richard was in contact with the family. But then she gets thrown another curveball in this conversation. The family would be delighted to have a chance to thank you both personally, Andy said. Of course, they write notes every year and I forward them to your husband. They always expressed how grateful they were to you and how much they hope to meet you one day. They visit the shelter occasionally. What you've done means so much to them. This includes Jason and his wife and children. This means Richard knew that Jason forgave her, but had let her live in fear for all of those years, and even fed into it. Moving on, Vanessa heads to Emma's apartment as they agreed upon. Thank you for seeing me. She doesn't respond. I've wanted to talk to you for so long. Something seems off. She isn't looking at me. Instead, she's glancing over her shoulder, towards her bedroom door. Out of the corner of my eye, I see that door begin to open. Obviously, Richard is there. He explains that he told Emma what really happened with the wine. He'd originally had her charge it to the company card, but realized it wasn't really a business expense, so canceled it and put it on his personal card instead. Vanessa said that's a lie, but Emma believes Richard. He tells her to stay away from Emma, or she would be arrested. Chapter 35 tells us that Vanessa wished she had the notebook she kept to give to Emma. Why doesn't she have the notebook, I hear you not asking? My husband stood in the doorway wearing boxers and a t-shirt, holding my notebook. You haven't been writing this week. Although I guess you've been busy. You went to the grocery store on Tuesday right after I left for work, and yesterday you drove to the wine shop in Katona. Sneaky, aren't you? Again, she clearly isn't the most reliable narrator with a serious drinking problem. I'm unclear on if she documented that or if she's being surveilled by Richard, though. He rifled through the pages. This is fucking insane. His sentence tumbled out faster and faster. Duke, Lamvindaloo, turning your picture around, I set off the house alarm. With every accusation, he tore out a new page. My parents' wedding photo, you snuck into the storage unit, you're wondering about my parents' cake topper, you've been going to the city to talk about marriage to some stranger, you're psychotic, you're even worse than your mother. Please, Richard, I sobbed. I'm so sorry, please. His first kick landed near my ribs. The pain was explosive. I curled into a ball and pulled my knees into my chest. You want to leave me? He shouted as he kicked me again. He climbed on top of me, forcing me onto my back and pinning my arms with his knees. His kneecaps ground into my elbows. His hands closed around my neck. You were supposed to love me forever. You were supposed to save me. His voice was soft and sad now. Those were the last words I heard before I blacked out. When I came to, I was still laying on the ground. The pages of my notebook had vanished. She hears Richard coming up the stairs and can do nothing but wait. He brings her a cup of coffee and she just apologizes, saying that she'd been drinking and not sleeping. She was out of her mind. She would never leave him. Of course he wouldn't leave me. I know that. He had regained his composure. I'd said the right words. I acknowledge I lost my temper, but you pushed me, he said, as if he'd merely snapped at me during a minor spat. You've been lying to me. You've been deceiving me. You are not acting like the Nellie I married. I've thought about it, and this is partly my fault. I indulge your depression. What you need is structure, a routine. From now on, you'll get up with me, we'll work out together in the morning, then we'll eat breakfast, more protein. You'll get fresh air every day, rejoin some committees at the club. You used to make an effort with dinner. I'd like for you to do that again. Yes, of course. I'm committed to our marriage, Nellie. Do not ever make me question whether you are again. Chapter 36 opens with Emma calling. You were right, says the husky voice I've come to know so well. I remain quiet. About the visa bill. I fear that even the slightest utterance will cause Emma to stop talking, change her mind, hang up. I called the credit card company. There was no wine charged from Sotheby's. Richard never ordered their avenue. They agreed to meet at the bridal shop since that's where Emma had planned to be anyways. Once they were face to face, Emma explains that Richard tracks her location. He did the same to her. He's the one who insists on buying his girlfriend's top-of-the-line phones after all. Emma starts to realize she didn't know the whole story and that she had this idea of Vanessa in her head, but it was wrong. The two women go back to Emma's apartment to talk further. While there, Emma decides to come clean about her involvement in her marriage ending. I reveal everything. The office holiday party where I first spotted her, the gathering at our house while I pretended to be drunk. That night I faked illness and suggested Richard take her to the Philharmonic, the business trip when I encouraged them to stay overnight. She is holding her head in her hands by the time I finished. How could you do this to me? She cries. She leaps to her feet and glares at me. I knew it all along. There really is something wrong with you. And you know what? I'm with her. After learning that the man you are dating is capable of killing you, the ex-wife admits to pushing you and him together. She very easily could have gotten Emma killed. Just an affair, Emma shouts, her cheeks flush with anger. The passion in her voice surprises me. Like it's some innocuous little thing. Affairs destroy people. Did you ever consider how much I would suffer? Again, I'm with her. Vanessa counters that she knows that affairs destroy people and says she was deceived by a married man in college, so she understands. Doesn't justify what she did to an innocent woman, though. Just let me say one final thing, I plead. Call Richard tonight and tell him that you can't go through with the wedding. Tell him I came over again and it was the last straw. She doesn't react, so I continue quickly as I begin to walk towards the door. Ask him to announce to everyone that the engagement is off. That part is really important, I stress. He won't punish you if he gets to control the message, if he comes out with his dignity. I pause in front of her so she cannot miss my words. Just say you can't deal with his psycho ex-wife. Promise me you'll do that, then you'll be safe. Emma clearly is thinking about it as the chapter ends. Chapter 37 starts with Richard and Vanessa mere feet from one another, but Richard doesn't know this. Emma agreed to talk to Richard, and Vanessa is hiding in her closet as backup in case he tries to hurt her. Emma tells Richard that Vanessa called, which upsets Richard, but Emma lies and says that it was to apologize. No, Richard, it wasn't like that. Vanessa apologized. She said she was going to leave me alone. My head is swimming. Emma is so far off any script I could have anticipated that I can't guess her intentions. She said that before. I can hear Richard breathing heavily, but she keeps calling and coming to the office and writing letters. She won't stop. She's insane. Honey, it's okay. I really believe her. She sounded different. Richard asks to drop the conversation and asks if Emma needs anything else from him. She declines and he leaves for the night. Emma tells Vanessa to come out, but is still very clearly wary of her. The last page of the chapter has a quote that confuses me, and I could be wrong, but it doesn't check out in the timeline. And the woman before both of us, the dark-haired ex who couldn't bear to keep the gift from Tiffany's, I am now certain he hurt her too. This is more than a fair assumption, but knowing who his ex is, this just doesn't fit the timeline properly. Chapter 38 starts heavy. The pages of my brand new life insurance policy unspool from the printer. I place it on my desk besides a note I've penned to Aunt Charlotte. It is the hardest letter I've ever written. In it, I've left information about my bank account with my swollen new balance so she can easily access it. She is the sole beneficiary of my life insurance policy as well. We also learned that Vanessa had called Jason, and he apologized, told her about his life, and wished her well. At the end of the chapter, Vanessa leaves the apartment, stopping to tell her aunt goodbye. She also asked her to go to Italy at the end of the summer, something they'd wanted to do since Vanessa was young. Chapter 39 starts with the ultimate confrontation. Vanessa waits in the hallway of Emma's apartment, waiting for Richard. Emma is in her apartment with Maureen, both unaware she's even in the building. Vanessa says she will tell Emma about the wine, tracking her phone, Duke, all these things that Richard doesn't know Emma already knows. Richard is obviously pissed. She did not calculate just how fast he would get this angry, though. He lunges at her and catches her by the throat. She had assumed that she'd be able to at least knock on the door before he grabbed her, but she's too far away. Desperate, Vanessa grabs an object from his pocket and slams it into Richard's head. His head then begins to bleed, and he cries out, and he lets her go. Emma walks out of the apartment to see Vanessa and Richard on the ground. Emma goes to call an ambulance when Maureen comes out of the apartment. What's going on? Her words grow sharper. Vanessa, why are you here? What did you do to him? He hurt me. My voice is hoarse, and every syllable feels as if one of the shards of porcelain is rubbing against the inside of my throat. I need to finally say these words. I grimace as I make my voice louder. He choked me. He nearly killed me. Just like he used to hurt me when we were married. Maureen gasps. He wouldn't. Not. Then she falls silent. She rushes to Richard and tells him it's okay, and that she'll take care of him and everything else. Vanessa's unsettable Maureen in this moment, though. Her voice is filled with something I can't identify at first because it's so out of place. I finally realize what it is. Satisfaction. Chapter 40 bothers me. Richard is spending 28 days at this acute mental health facility where he is undergoing intensive daily therapy sessions. It's part of the deal he made to avoid being prosecuted for assaulting me. This just doesn't make sense to me. It could be a legit thing that happens and I could be totally wrong, but he doesn't have any mental health issues that would put you in a facility rather than jail. I have never heard of a deal, not a plea deal mind you, that allows you to go to a mental institution to avoid jail. I get that he's rich and so is his sister, but omitting the word plea when saying part of the deal feels intentional, Why wouldn't Vanessa press charges? Why would she agree to this? He didn't have to admit guilt if this was not a plea deal. It makes no sense. Please let me know if you have an insight or if I'm totally off base with that, but this feels wrong. Anyways, Vanessa goes to the facility on request of Richard to talk. Maureen is there, explaining that she took a leave of absence to be there every day for him, but adds some lore. Vanessa knows that their parents died in a car accident, but what she didn't know was that their father was speeding and was at fault, but that Richard was in the car. Now, he told police that he didn't remember much, but he had been trapped in the car, sustained head trauma, and it took quite some time before another car came upon the crash and called for help. Maureen says that it was common for her dad to speed and get angry, and that he was abusive to their mother. We also learn the deal with the wedding cake topper. Richard had bought the cake topper for their parents years after the wedding for their anniversary. He had this plan to cook them dinner, bake a cake, and this would make them fall in love with each other again. But once again, it gets creepy and incestuous, and I don't vibe with it. But Richard really has no business being married to anyone, and it's my job now to make sure that that doesn't happen. She suddenly smiles, a wide grin, and I'm completely unnerved. Same for once, Vanessa. Same. Maureen leaves to give Richard and Vanessa a few minutes to talk. I'm sorry, Vanessa. He's apologized to me before, but this time I know his words are different. At last, they are real. Is there any way you could give me another chance? I'm getting better. We could start over. I'm gonna be honest, I was caught off guard by this, but he continues in a very sad but seemingly genuine way. We could adopt a child. We could make it perfect this time. He wipes his eyes. I have never seen him cry before. Maureen interrupts at this point, telling Vanessa it's time to go. As they're leaving, Maureen says something that gets Vanessa thinking. You can do whatever you want with the wedding album. I gesture to the bag. It was my gift to Richard, so it's rightfully his. I remember, Terry did a nice job. Lucky that he was able to fit you in that day after all. I stopped short. I've never told anyone how close we'd been to not having a photographer at our ceremony. So she sabotaged the photographer all those years ago, but why? Incest vibes, seriously. Also in the bag that she had given Maureen was her wedding ring. As she's leaving, Maureen touches her arm to say goodbye, and Vanessa feels cold metal. She realizes that Maureen is wearing the wedding band on her ring finger. Maureen says it's for safekeeping, and the chapter ends. Chapter 41 proves that the timeline is confused. This chapter is about Vanessa seeing a therapist again. This therapist is named Kate, and Vanessa hasn't seen her since she was married to Richard. Kate is also Richard's first wife, and Vanessa knew that all those years ago, and is why she sought out her specifically. She didn't reveal herself as the ex until the second session. Kate had also been abused, and she ended up suffering a permanent disability from Richard pushing her down the stairs, though this last bit isn't revealed until the present. In the present, Vanessa is filling Kate in on what happened, and she's happy that both Emma and Vanessa are safe, and that Richard is in a facility getting help. Now, let's touch on the plot hole, I suppose I can call it. Back in chapter 37, Vanessa said, and the woman before both of us, the dark-haired ex who couldn't bear to keep the gift from Tiffany's, I'm now certain he hurt her too. She has known this for years by the time she said that. It isn't a revelation. She didn't say it to Emma. This was an internal thought that makes no sense in the present. Chapter 42 gives us some info on Vanessa's life after everything. Her and Aunt Charlotte have their tickets and an itinerary for their upcoming trip to Italy. Vanessa has a job as a preschool teacher lined up. She also meets with Sam again for the first time in years, and it's revealed that Sam is now married. The epilogue is the only chapter not told from Vanessa's point of view. This chapter is from the point of view of Emma. She is stalking Vanessa at the beginning of the chapter, but apparently has been for a long time. Vanessa never realized I was a threat. She only saw what I wanted her to see. She bought into the illusion I created. She thinks I am Emma Sutton, the innocent woman who fell into the trap she laid to escape her husband. I'm still stunned by Vanessa's admission that she orchestrated my affair with Richard. I thought I was the only one spinning a web. I can almost guarantee that you cannot guess who this person ends up being, because this is ridiculous. I look down at the photograph I am clutching. The edges are worn from age and frequent handling. It is a picture of a seemingly happy family. A father, a mother, a little boy with dimples, and a preteen girl with braces. The photo was taken years ago when I was 12, back when we lived in Florida, a few months before our family shattered. This is now going to be a long quote, so bear with me. It was after 10 p.m. and I should have been asleep. It was past my bedtime, but I wasn't. I heard the doorbell ring, then my mother call, "I'll get it." My father was in his room, probably grading papers. He often did that at night. I heard the murmur of voices, then my father scrambling down the hallway towards the stairs. "Vanessa!" he cried. His voice sounded so strained it propelled me out of my room. My socks slid silently along the carpeted floor as I crept past my younger brother's bedroom to the top of the stairs and huddled there. I could see everything unfolding directly below me. I was a spectator in the shadows. I witnessed my mother fold her arms and glare at my father. I witnessed my father gesture with his hands as he talked. I witnessed my little calico cat whine between my mother's legs as if trying to soothe her. After my mother slammed the door, she turned to my dad. I will never forget how her face looked in that moment. "She came on to me," my father insisted, his round blue eyes, so like mine, widening. "She kept showing up during my office hours and asking for extra help. I tried to turn her away, and she kept... It was nothing, I swear." Emma's father ended up moving out. Her mother was always angry at her father, but also at Vanessa, who she said enticed him to cheat. Emma heard her name, Vanessa, thrown out regularly by her mother, who fought with her father. Emma found out who Vanessa was when she visited New York after graduating. She was desperate to get close to Vanessa, but was unable to, so she changed tactics to get close to her husband instead. "I expected him to want to sleep with me. Men usually did. That would have been enough. Even if it was just for one night, eventually his wife would have found out. I'd made certain of it. The symmetry of it appealed to me. It felt like justice. However, he didn't at that time, and instead just told her to apply for a secretary position. But she's looking back and realizing she was wrong. About my father, I was deceived once by a married man when I was in college. Vanessa had said that on the day we'd met at the bridal salon. I thought he loved me. He never told me about his wife. I was wrong about Richard. If you marry Richard, you will regret it, she warned me when she confronted me outside my apartment. And later, while Richard stood beside me, she tried again, even though she was visibly scared. He will hurt you. I was wrong about Vanessa. It is only fair that she knows she was wrong about me, too. Emma goes across the street to talk to Vanessa. She tells her the story of that night and gives her the photo. Vanessa says she recognized her eyes, and she was suspicious when she looked Emma Sutton up, and there was little to no information available. They part on amicable terms. Now that that much too in-depth review is done, I have issues. There are several editing issues throughout the book. Missing words, added words that don't make sense, grammatical errors, etc. As someone who is dyslexic, it really isn't a big deal and didn't affect my read too greatly, just annoying here and there. That aside, I'm sorry, but this just wasn't a thriller. The premise is great. I was so excited to see how it played out. Assume nothing, after all. I was more than let down. Let's start with the alternating chapters. It was initially compelling. It is clearly set up for the reader to assume that Nellie is the new fiancé and that Vanessa is the ex-wife who is stalking her. I liked that idea. I think that it really worked in that context. But that wasn't what the story was, and I think that the authors tried too hard to make the reader think that it just ends up not working. She becomes a stalker who torments the new fiancé the same way that she felt tormented when she was the new fiancé. I do not have sympathy for her actions in that way, regardless of intention. I'm also about to sound like an idiot, so just hear me out, okay? I initially thought the thriller aspect of the book was going to be that Richard is molding women to fit his model of a perfect wife. What I mean is that I was comparing what Vanessa was saying happened to her and what Nellie had been through. The trauma from October, both being from Florida, having met Richard on a plane, both hating planes, being nicknamed Nellie, both being preschool teachers, the waitressing as a second job, having friends of the same name. I really thought that he was finding or stalking women who fit his criteria, then romancing them. I loved that idea for a thriller. Yes, I know that it was just being made clear that Vanessa and Nellie are the same person, just pre/post marriage. In my defense, I was reading it a chapter or two at a time during my lunch breaks and wasn't analyzing it like I did during my second read through. My biggest issue with the split perspective is that it doesn't add anything other than it ends up being a plot twist. All you get from Nellie is how perfect Richard is. There are mild signs of manipulation or the beginning inklings of other abuse, but it's just chapter after chapter of how wonderful her life will be and how much she loves him and how perfect he is and how amazing their life will be. While Vanessa just moans about how much she misses Richard and the perfect life and how blindsided she was about the divorce and how it isn't fair he's getting remarried. There is nothing about why their marriage ended, how bad it really was, or what the true issues are. Which is why I think that the authors wrote the premise and they just put it aside and never looked at it again. I have read through this book a total of 3 or 4 times in total now, and there is no way to reread her moaning about missing her ex-husband, the stalking, the mourning. None of it rereads as anything but love and jealousy. The intent was to have the reader learn the twist and then think back on moments that we just missed the double meaning and that we see now all along. She wasn't actually missing him or mourning, but it just doesn't work because there is no double meaning. Overall, I will say I enjoyed part 1 during my first read. I liked the idea of what the thriller was in my mind. That being said, I did DNF this book, or did not finish this book, before the end of part 1 during my first read. It was just so boring and long and chapters filled with filler. I just couldn't get into it every lunch break. I did start to dislike it by the time I DNF'd, so I put it down. But I love reading, has always been one of my favorite hobbies, and I also love to tell my friends and family a detailed account of what happened in my book after I finished it. I realized a few months ago that while my family probably doesn't want to hear me rehash a whole book while adding my own commentary, there is an audience out there for me, so when I realized that, I thought of this book, and here we are. Part 2 and 3 are just not good. I say that while excluding the epilogue. I will get to that. Love that we finally get to know what happened in October in college, though. Wish we could have just gotten the full story in one go. It being so broken up makes the story a little bit difficult to follow. I did actually like the reveal that Daniel, the professor boyfriend, was married. That was a twist I actually enjoyed, and that made sense. I hated that Vanessa orchestrated the whole divorce. I totally get being trapped in an abusive relationship, but no matter what, you do not have the right to replace yourself and put someone innocent into your shoes to be abused. She says that she thought it would just be an affair, but I don't believe that. She knows how Richard loves, and if he was still into this girl when he stopped being interested in his marriage, why would she not believe he was all in? He gave up on the marriage before the divorce, and gave his all to his girlfriend. It's pretty clear they were going to stay a couple. Maybe not get married so fast, but stay a couple at least. The reveal that he was an abusive asshole was not a twist. It was obvious that he was abusive from the beginning. I wasn't surprised. It wasn't even subtle foreshadowing. I also understand that abuse comes in many varieties. This is a reason that the trope of abuser abuses then buys a gift to smooth it over, promises to never do it again, and then does it again, rinse and repeat. That is absolutely a real cycle that happens. But in a thriller, I want it to be subtle. I was abused in my last relationship, and I was able to get out without it being as physically abusive as Richard and Vanessa's. The type of abuse I went through was with a narcissist, so it was manipulation based for the most part. Now, I did like the gaslighting angle that this book did, as this is the subtle abuse that you don't notice when you're in it. You question your own reality, your memories, everything. You're always wrong. Even when you're right, you're wrong in these relationships. This idea in the book doesn't exactly work, though. And that is my issue. Vanessa is painted as untrustworthy. She has a serious drinking problem that she completely ignores as an issue, even looking back at her heaviest drinking days. So I don't trust her version of the past when alcohol is involved. Addicts always think they are so subtle and so sneaky that they can get away with it right under people's noses and no one's the wiser. But they are so obvious the whole time. So their version of what happened and the truth often varies greatly. Then you have the mental illness that her mother dealt with. The idea that Vanessa also has it is pushed pretty hard at times. In the event that she does have whatever illness that her mother has and is just refusing to be tested, or even just acknowledge she might have something going on in her mental health department, just makes me not trust her judgment or telling of events. I'm not saying she isn't being gaslit at times. She totally could be, but I don't know when to trust her and when not to. Now for the epilogue. Truly, this book should have ended and not included this dog shit. Loved that Vanessa and her aunt were gonna go to Italy, that Richard is doing his own thing, everyone's happy. But no, the author just can't let me be happy. Emma is not Emma. Crazy twist that I didn't see coming, and hate. It is so convoluted and makes no sense. It makes sense that Emma would hate the woman that she thinks broke up her parents' marriage, especially at 12. That is valid. But to hold on to that hate to the point you stalk the woman, move to a whole nother state, start a career in a field I assume she didn't get a degree in, seduce her husband, and get engaged to the man, all to get revenge? Far-fetched as hell. I would say that there is someone out there. They're desperate enough to do just that, but it is so incredibly unbelievable. This epilogue, it just makes a bad book even worse. Now here are some questions I have that I still have no answers for after reading the book. Why did the fact that Vanessa and Emma have the same hair color matter? There is a mention in the book during their first confrontation that Vanessa knows that their hair colors are identical. I get that this is before the reveal that Vanessa orchestrated the affair, but it makes no sense even after the reveal. You are the one who picked her, not Richard. She tries to make it sound like just Richard has a type, but that isn't the case at all and just makes no sense to mention. Next, what happened to Sam's keys? Kate never had anything to do with that part of Richard's life after the divorce, so not her. It wasn't Richard because it was a woman. I thought maybe it was Maureen because of photographer thing, but Sam would have recognized her at the wedding because Maureen was the maid of honor. So I have no idea who it was, or if Sam just misplaced her keys. Another question is, what the hell happened with the picture frame being turned? Obviously the maid didn't do it, or it wouldn't have been included in the story. We see Vanessa turn the picture frame in Richard's office when she is posing as Emma, a nod to her frame being turned, but we don't know who turned hers. He wasn't cheating on Kate with Vanessa, so she wouldn't have done it. Emma wasn't stalking her at that point. She was still too young and was living in Florida. The only thing I can think is that it was Maureen when she came over to see Richard. It could be a nod to their creepy relationship, but we don't get any closure on that. Who's the wife between them? I'm assuming it doesn't apply to Maureen and that completely unnecessary incest angle. If it doesn't apply to her, then who does it apply to? Nellie and Vanessa are with Richard after his first wife is very out of the picture. Emma dates him when he's married, but Vanessa doesn't get in their way and encourages the relationship. I assume it's meant to apply to Vanessa and Emma's relationship, but there is no wife between them. If you get it, please explain it, because I don't. Who's the woman that ran into Nellie in the bathroom in chapter 3? We are meant to think it's Vanessa because we don't know that they're the same person yet. We know it isn't Kate because she has nothing to do with Richard, so wouldn't be in the restaurant he frequents. It wasn't Maureen because she would have no reason to immediately leave the bathroom instead of trying to help her up. So who was it? It seems important to the story, but it's likely just the authors trying to create this illusion that Nellie and Vanessa are different people and just missed the mark for everyone when looking back. Why include Kate? Keeping her completely out of the main story and only keeping her in the vague mentions would have given you a thriller aspect. If we never met her, we as a reader could maybe draw the conclusion that she died, especially when Vanessa has that realization on page 316 that she was likely abused too. So to leave it open to interpretation, one could assume that she was murdered, and that's thrillery. But nope, just had to include her. In doing so though, it just doesn't add anything and takes away from the overall plot. Vanessa sought her out for some reason. She'd already resolved to leave her husband because of her own abuse. So what did Kate add? It's not like Vanessa was leaving to protect Kate or some weird justice for Kate. If she cared about how Richard affected other women, she wouldn't have put Emma directly in harm's way. Having Kate involved literally gives us the plot hole that after meeting her, knowing she was abused too, and that she was hiding from Richard, Vanessa is still somehow supposedly in the dark about her being abused. Then when she goes to update Kate at the end of the book, she is somehow totally on board with Vanessa having put Emma in danger for no reason ultimately. Kate shows Vanessa that it is possible to get away on her own, as Richard didn't come after Kate. So why would Vanessa do what she did, and why was Kate okay with all of it? Last question I have is about the Maureen shit, because why? I called that something hinky was going on from the first interaction between the siblings, and I hate that. There was real promise for Maureen being a good-ish person when we learned that she canceled the photographer. If she had done that to try to sabotage the relationship, that would have been great. I wish that it was more obvious, but it's a book and they can only give us so much, so, if they gave us too much, the book would suck. But they could have totally run with the idea that Maureen was so close to Richard to try to prevent him from becoming their father, trying to sabotage relationships to protect the girls. And that first hint was the canceled photographer. But nope. I had to make it incesty. I had not originally realized that there were multiple parts to the book, so when I got to the end of part 1, I made a prediction about where the book was going. He's in love with Maureen, or she is his first wife. He being Richard, of course. I also could have seen her being his secret lover, posing as his sister. Maybe she was allowing to have these affairs so that he didn't abuse her instead. That would make it a thriller. Overall, I clearly did not enjoy this book, which is disappointing because the premise gave us so much promise, and I wish the book had delivered on that promise. Like a lot of newer books, and definitely some older ones, the authors cared more about the twists and catching the reader off guard that they neglected creating a compelling thriller, let alone putting the whole plot on the back burner for the nonsense filler time and time again. So yeah, there you go. There you have it. That is my first book review. Super long, and I hope you guys enjoyed that because it was a lot of work putting that together, but honestly, I had a lot of fun doing that, and then also now talking about it. It feels cathartic to get it off of my chest and out of my brain. I do already have the next book picked out for this series, and that is The Housewarming by S.E. Lynn. Again, that is a book that I did not enjoy, so that will probably be just as, I'll say, negative as this review. I don't want to come across as just super negative and bitchy, because to get a book published is not the easiest thing in the world. And obviously, like, these are first-time authors. It's 2 women. I never said that. It's Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen. They are first-time authors. And I will say that, like, it's impressive to get a book published. And I don't want to discourage any authors or future authors to not put themselves out there to get it published. Just because your first book may not be the best, you're learning, and I'm still impressed and proud of you for getting your book published, and encourage you to go out there and do that if that is what you want. But I didn't like the book, and I think that it is fully within a reader's right to talk about why they didn't like a book, and you can improve as an author or whatever, but these reviews are mainly for other readers, because I don't want anybody to waste their time reading a book that they didn't enjoy. On Goodreads, this book has almost a 4-star rating. I think it's like a 3.84 at time of recording this, and it means that I fall in the minority of people who didn't like the book. There are plenty of other reviews on Goodreads, and I will link the Goodreads reviews in the description if you want to go and see some other people's reviews. Some of them are pretty scathing, and other ones are very positive. So if you enjoyed the book, good for you. I'm glad that other people can get entertainment and enjoyment out of these books that I don't like. That's totally fine. I like books other people don't like. That's just how it is. We all have different tastes. So while I may think negatively of this book, I don't want anybody else to go and hate towards an author that they haven't read the book yet. But with that being said, I'm still going to talk about books that I do and do not like, however I feel necessary. So yeah. With that being said, the next book, I am going to talk negatively about it again. I do not enjoy it. I also am going to probably stick more to thrillers or fantasy books. I will put on the screen now what my library contains. So I have 96 physical books and 44 digital books at time of recording. I intend to get more physical books, and then I trade out my books digitally because I have Kindle Unlimited, and so you can only borrow a set amount at a time. So I just have to return those books and get a new one. And so I generally keep about 44 books in my Kindle library. But I will put on screen a breakdown of the genres, what percentages I have of each type of book in my library. I'll do it by physical books, digital books, and then the total if you combine both types of books. With that being said, I have 49% thriller and mystery books in my library. I will say that number is a little bit skewed because for my physical books, I have Goosebumps books, and I didn't know what to include those in, so I just put them in thriller and mystery instead of putting horror as a genre. But in total, almost 50% of my books in total currently are thrillers, and I'm going to be getting more thrillers because that is just a genre that I've enjoyed more than anything else for the last 1.5 to 2 years. The next highest total is fantasy books at 24% of my total books. I really love young adult fantasy, and I have for a long time. That's pretty much what I've always enjoyed. Not so much anymore. I don't generally pick up a fantasy book, but I do have a fantasy book that I'm going to review a little bit later in this series. But yeah, if you want to see another genre, these are the genres that I currently have. So if any of these, pique your interest, let me know. I definitely want to review Frankenstein. I own Dracula, Wuthering Heights. If you want to hear me talk about Wuthering Heights, I own Wuthering Heights. But yeah, just let me know if there's another genre that you want me to talk about specifically, because otherwise I'm just going to probably stick with thrillers because that's what I enjoy. That's what I feel like I'm able to reread and get into. So that's just kind of what it's going to be for the time being. But yeah, I also probably will talk about books that I am not the biggest fan of, because it's a lot easier to critique those books, just because whenever you don't like something, the issues stand out a lot more than when you like something. And I personally don't listen to negative reviews on books that I like. That's just how it is, because I don't feel that that's necessary. I like something, somebody else doesn't like it, and same with if somebody likes the book that I just reviewed, they probably won't listen to this review because they like it, and that's totally fine. I get that. So I probably won't review too many books that I like. I do plan on reviewing Frankenstein at some point because there are things about the storyline that I don't like. Not the writing, nothing like that. I really enjoy the book. It's tied with my first favorite book, for my first favorite book. And so that's one that I would talk more about the story than anything else, especially because I'm not wholly versed in classical writing and the time period that it was written for. I'm also not really well versed in sci-fi, so I can only do so much. I'm well versed at this point in thrillers, and my mother is a writer, my aunt is a writer, and my mom and I have both edited books for other people, and so I'm more aware of how it works for thrillers and fantasy, and so I'm more confident to review those on a whole, as grammar, writing, voice, stuff like that. I'm more comfortable reviewing that kind of stuff. But I do want to talk about books like Frankenstein, because I enjoy that book, but there's issues that I have with it. But yeah, I feel like I'm just rambling at this point, so I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions that maybe I can answer, if you have anything to add about the book, or if you have any explanations for a couple of the things that I talked about that I asked for other opinions on, please let me know in the comments below, or you can email me if you don't really want to put it in public. That's fine. I'm fine either way. Like, I want to know your guys' opinion, whether or not you feel comfortable posting it to a public platform. If you email me, then I won't share it publicly. If I ever do, like, hey, like, a little, like, recap in my next one, be like, hey, this is what people have said. I will only take those from the comments, because if you're not comfortable putting it public, I won't put it public. That's totally fine. But yeah, I have no idea when this book is coming out, because I'm currently at 2 hours of recording. And I'm thinking that I can maybe cut it down to like an hour and 15 minutes. I'm hoping for length. But yeah, so super fun. So I'm hoping to have it out by the end of January, but we'll see. Either way, I'm gonna start working tonight because I'm finished this book. Tonight I will start rereading The Housewarming by S.E. Lynn, and then I'll start doing more notes on that and starting to get together a script. It should be a little bit quicker because I've already read that book and it's a little bit shorter. And I already have notes from last time I put it on my Kindle Unlimited. But yeah, my throat hurts. I'm out of water. So I will see you guys next time. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.